I started attending all of these farming conferences. Everything I could get my hands on, I read. I went to the workshops, I went to the keynotes. And it didn't take long for me to realize that there weren't a lot of folks who looked like me or had a life experience like mine in that organic, regenerative farming world. The presenters were white men. The authors on those book tables were white men. And I started to have a lot of doubts, wondering if, I'm a pretty intelligent person, I'm a hard worker. So was I being a traitor to my people and choosing this path of life on land, of sustainable agriculture? Maybe I should be focused on uh, the impacts of gun violence on our community. Maybe I need to be focused on, education disparities. So what am I doing here messing around with some tomatoes, right? And I started to really uh, reconsider that choice, even though it was my heart. And fortunately, one of my mentors, Karen Washington of Rise and Root Farm, Black Urban Growers, and now the president of the board of Soulfire Farm. Congratulations, Mama Karen. She saw me at one of those conferences when I was a wee one. And she said, Leah, it will not be long until we have a book that uplifts our contributions to farming. It will not be long until we have a conference of our own where we can come together and share ideas and support each other. And little did we know back at the time that I would write one of those books and she would start one of those conferences, right? But I think the point there is that for so long we have been taught that all of these things we cherish as organic growers, things like raised beds and compost, things like cover crops and polycultures, slow food even, that these are somehow white Western concepts or even ahistorical. And what was so important for me in that journey of healing personally was to research and understand that Black people's relationship to land is not only defined by slavery, sharecropping, and convict leasing, but we actually have a many thousands of year history of noble, dignified relationship to land. The Ovambo people of Namibia are the ones first documented to make raised beds, right? Cleopatra, the first composter in Egypt. We have the Fanya Juve terraces of Kenya, which are amazing at erosion control and carbon sequestration. Over 70 polyculture combinations just in Nigeria alone. And so there are so many technologies, not to mention when you get to the United States, George Washington Carver, the father of regenerative in this nation, Booker T. Watley, the father of farm to table and the CSA, the community supported agriculture. So it was very important for me to understand and uplift these stories. Now, of course, it's not just about personal motivation and belonging. Being a Black farmer in the United States, there's also a lot of structural challenges there. For folks who don't know, at the end of chattel slavery's legal demise, there was a promise made to Black Americans, recently emancipated, of 40 acres and a mule. Now, this promise was never fulfilled. It was rescinded. And in fact, reparations were given to those who owned, quote, slaves in the DC area for lost property. So despite all this, our ancestors actually had to save their own money to purchase almost 16 million acres by 1910. And we have since lost nearly all of that acreage, not by choice, but because the federal government itself has systematically discriminated against Black farmers, because white supremacist groups like the Klan and the Whitecaps systematically lynched and destroyed the homes of Black farmers because they threatened the plantation economy, drove them off the land, stole their deeds. And now we're struggling with corporate land grabs by retirement companies of Black farmland. So that context of land theft, of the government really not being on your team, in fact, trying to undermine your sovereignty, is what I came into. And so as a young person, I don't know if you all experienced this, but I didn't always think about things in a systems way. I would think, oh, it's just my personal problem. If my teachers give me the side eye when I walk into an honors class, that's my personal problem. It has nothing to do with race or gender, right? But when you educate yourself, when I educate myself, I start to understand one of the reasons that we do own land collectively, which I'm very proud of after many generations of landlessness in our family, but we own, our government classifies soils. They rank them from best to worst on a 13-point scale. Our soil is the worst, right? We're in the mountains. It's cold. There are Trump flags flying everywhere. The soils are thin and heavy clay. So this is the land, if we can get land, and I know that I'm in that fortunate 10%, the type of lands we can afford, you know, contaminated with lead, highly eroded and degraded. And so we start behind, you know, in terms of entering the market. And so those are some personal challenges. I mean, I share a lot of challenges that all farmers have with, you know, pests and climate change and crop loss, and, you know, all of that touches us deeply. But I will say, you know, on a hopeful note, is that my daughter Nashima, who's, I can't believe now, a high school graduate, she says, you know, Mom, the food system is everything it takes to get sunshine onto your plate. So I like to think about this whole arc of intervention of how we can fix and address these disparities in the food system, right? It's not just about land ownership. It's about how our farm workers treated. It's about food apartheid. In other words, who has access to safe, healthy, culturally appropriate food, right? It's about corporate control versus people control. It's about honoring the earth. And because we have personally experienced, we the Soul Fire Farm team have personally experienced so many of these points of oppression and alienation in the food system, we are well positioned to fight back. And so we have dedicated our entire lives to this. I mean, we are running training programs for that next generation of Black and brown farmers. We're advocating for the rights of farm workers. We're delivering free and low cost food to people who need it in the community in a dignified manner that honors relationship, helping to build urban gardens, writing books, you know, speaking, trying to get the word out. And it's been really powerful to see recently, you know, the candidates for the Democratic nomination, they all reached out to all of us to ask, what does a platform look like on agriculture? That is something that would have been inconceivable a decade ago, to have people at that level of power looking to Black farmers for guidance about the next steps in our food system. So I am hopeful, and when I do get discouraged, I always think about, you know, my great grandmas who were, you know, on the shores of West Africa, watching their families get kidnapped, snatched up, forced into slave ships, and they had that audacious courage to pick up their seeds, their cowpea, their black rice, their egusi melon, right? Braid those seeds into their hair as insurance for their children and for future generations. So if they can face that and save those seeds for us, then we also have to remember to gather up our physical and metaphorical seeds and braid them into our hair so we have something to pass on down. So the challenges are big, but any problems that humans create, humans can undo. So we need to work together to create a just and sustainable food system. Thanks so much.